Welcome back to the bonus content, Queens.
Welcome back.
And as promised, we have part 2 of our logical fallacy series, getting philosophical again.
Yeah, knowing how to take apart arguments without succumbing to the emotional tricks that they play on you.
Yeah, and I think it's also recognizing when you're being emotionally manipulated and when you're probably arguing with. I always find in life you have to pick your battles, right? And I always find if people resort to things like ad hominem or misrepresenting my argument, I don't mean to sound this in a snobby way, but it gives me an indication that perhaps this person isn't really worth engaging with because they're not actually engaging with what I'm saying.
Absolutely. I don't have a problem being a snob. I am a snob.
Intellectual snob. Intellectual snob unite.
And values snob. I mean, it doesn't mean I'm going to be rude, but I do have like a sort of hierarchy for people. If I happen to talk with somebody who is mean or is engaging in bad faith arguments, it's not good. I'm going to slap his face, but why would I waste energy there?
That's it. And you'll see a lot of people on the internet, especially, who do this. And I do feel like, I don't know, again, I don't know what life was like before the internet, but I feel like people should be more enlightened and more knowledgeable because we have the internet. But I don't know about you, Patricia. I feel like we're going backwards. I really do.
Exposure to information doesn't make you more smart. It makes you more stupid. I actually was listening to like an intellectual crazy podcast, and they were talking about how when writing was invented, you can correlate that to today's reels or like stupid memes. There was a lot of literature about absolutely nothing and stupid things, and that was the popular one. So no, information doesn't make people smarter on its own. It's your choice.
Or access to more information. I just feel it's not even about reading. A lot of people just clearly just don't read. And it's like we have books online now. You don't have to step foot in a library anymore, which I think is possibly a bad thing because I feel like if people wanted knowledge previously, they'd have to actively seek it out. But it almost feels like we get it in our homes and then we just do nothing with it. It's just made us lazy. I don't know.
You still need to actively seek it out, but the active is like putting your thumbs on a screen. So it's a lot less effort. Also, I will say I do have like my ability to read has dwindled over the years.
Same.
But I can listen to like a very long like series of, lectures as podcasts, as audiobook and books. And a lot of these things are available online. So it really is up to us. Like I will say honestly about the logical fallacies, it is a subject that I might have been curious about in the past, but maybe thought that it would be like a too big of a learning curve for me to engage in. So I'm happy for you doing this introductory. And also, in the context that you're presenting here, that it's not like we're saying like, FDS doesn't support arguing with people who aren't worth your time. But sometimes even your friends or even people who are quote unquote on your side or your inner circle might be, affected with an A with these logical fallacies. And then you can, enlighten them, or like you all can be more enlightened together by understanding how your mind is also based on these fallacies or your way of engaging with reality.
Exactly. Well said, as always, Patricia. So the next one is the slippery slope. As I like to say, the slippery slope has slopped. So the slippery slope fallacy is the suggestion that a small action will lead to an extreme negative outcome. So an example of this is basically if women have high standards, then no one will get married and the population will die out. And we see this coming through articles such as the male loneliness pandemic, right? For example, epidemic, pandemic. Which one's greater, Patricia? Is it epidemic? Is it pandemic is bigger?
Are you asking me or are you asking Google?
I was asking you.
Oh, me? I don't know.
Okay, epidemic / pandemic. So basically the male loneliness problem. Also, as an aside, it also forgets that a lot of women are very lonely as well. But anyway, that's an aside. So it's basically used against women to trick us into settling by basically saying, well, if you don't settle and, have 4 kids with a guy, humanity will die out. When actually, I sort of feel like this is a massive red herring because, again, I'm just guessing here. But if we go back to our dear ancestors in the hunter-gatherers, they most likely procreated with people who had the best chances of survival. Survival being, people who could hunt, people who could find food, people who could keep them safe, right?
Yeah, people who are also well connected socially, because I think I would imagine back in those times being liked meant access to resources. And I think that's why we're also very inclined to notice when we're not liked, because our mind is like, oh, if the clan doesn't like me, I'm not going to get fed and I'm going to die.
And it still exists in a certain way today. Obviously, it's not as extreme. But obviously, if you're part of a community, if you are well liked in your community, then you will have better outcomes than somebody who isn't.
Absolutely. And if good jobs, good apartments, they come through word of mouth. And what is word of mouth? It's people liking you and wanting to help you.
That is exactly. So, but going back to the slippery slope fallacy, in some respects, is it a slippery slope? I mean, the population of the world is absolutely massive. So even if, it reduced by a couple million, I don't think it would make a massive difference in terms of resources. And it probably does need to reduce. I'm not saying eugenics or we need to artificially reduce it. But if people have fewer children, it may not necessarily be a bad thing from a resource point of view. An example is that the cemeteries in London are getting full. So they're having to bury people in woodlands on the edge of the M25 because there's just no space anymore.
I mean, cemeteries are on its own like a really interesting pickle because people get buried over centuries, but they're not going anywhere, and people who come to their graves are already long gone. So that's an interesting on its own. But to address the main point here, I think the specific argument of like, oh, the human race will die out. First of all, there's a bit to unpack there. First of all, the world, usually we people who live in the West, what we call the world is not the world. It's like 30% of the world, maybe. There are a lot of parts of the world that we don't even consider when we say things about the world. That's the first thing. Secondly, more to the point, and I think this is something that was addressed more deeply in a prior episode, this movement of people, specifically women, having less children as their quality of life increases is a serious thing that is happening. And like society's approach to that, to make women marry, like if you look at now trying to ban abortions in the state, that's what it's about. No fault divorce, that's what it's about. Things that are happening in Japan that we discussed in prior episodes, like trying to coerce women into marrying, financial incentives to having children and stuff like that. That is not the way. People are opting out of something if it's not good for them. They're voting with their legs. I don't know if you have that expression, but people are having less children or they're getting married less because they think that being alone is better for them and it's going to make their life more comfortable. And you know what? That is like a research-based fact. So the way to do that is not to tell women, oh, you have to do this because otherwise. That is not the way. The way to do that is to make that option more attractive. And we in FDS say, like, if a man is sexually attractive, doesn't know how to treat women, is audacious, disrespectful, basically a scrote, he should be selected out of the gene pool. I have no tears for him.
This is what I was going to say. Like, I don't think it will cause humanity to go extinct. I think the opposite. If you procreate with people who have, strong genes, good attitudes, good values, that's then going to be passed down and it will make the human race better and stronger.
And not only passed down, but like also if you think about environmental factors, you're more likely to have a household that is happy, healthy, has good communication, good values, and then you will more likely have well-adjusted children that will be beneficial to society, all that kind of stuff. That's not going to happen if you marry a total scrote because you don't want to be alone.
Because I've seen it in my family, Patricia, like the scrotery has caused so many generational, like it's not even just affecting them. Like, so I'll give an example. So my grandfather had, how many kids has he got? Maybe 16.
Dang.
Actually, no, I'm doing the total for my... So my maternal grandfather had 9 children by 5 different women. And my maternal grandmother, she has about the same number of kids with 3 different men, right?
Wow.
Yeah, no, polygamy is really bad in Nigeria. Same with my paternal grandfather. He had a whole second family. So my dad was the youngest of 5 officially, but my paternal grandfather then had 3 more kids with another woman. So my dad was technically one of 8, but he never acknowledged that family, bless him. But yeah, anyway, and even to this day, even though my grandparents, they're long, apart from my maternal grandmother, she's still alive, but all my other grandparents are deceased, but you still see the problems that has caused in the family to this day. And it's affecting, their children, their grandchildren, great-grandchildren. It's just generational impact, right? And to think if they just hadn't have done that it would have been a nicer experience for their descendants as well. So, your choice of partner as a woman, and also I guess that my grandmothers didn't choose to be with, cheating men, but even still, But basically, your choice of partner doesn't just impact you, it will impact your children, your grandchildren, great grandchildren, and it can go down a long way in the line of your descendants, you know?
Definitely. This is where the very real, for me, concept of generational trauma comes in. Because, like, my mom was insecure, so she chose a man who was, very, God bless my dad, but he had issues. And so my brother and I have issues. I think I worked on my issues more than my brother, but you see what I mean? It's kind of like you have to zoom in, really shed a light on what's going on with you, and then try to move in reality in a way that is healthy as much as you can. Yeah.
Yeah, because even like the good dads, like, my dad, I'd say, was a very excellent dad, but I can now see some of the effects. Like, now he's passed away, I can now see the impact of some of the decisions that he made when he was alive. They're now coming out in quite a potent way. And it's not like a destructive way. So just imagine, right, if my mum had chosen an absolute non-starter scrote, just imagine just how bad that would have been. I recognize that parents, my dad wasn't perfect. Parents are also figuring, they'll never tell you this, but parents are also sort of making up as they go along. They don't always know what they're doing.
Of course.
And they can get it wrong as a result. But rather than admit, I don't know what I'm doing, they'll just say, well, I'm the parent. So, that's it.
This is why it's called generational trauma, because they're acting in this way because, they also had difficult childhoods. Like, my parents grew up in the former Soviet Union. I think I told this before. My dad quit smoking at age 12. Just saying.
Wait, so he became a smoking addict and then managed to quit by the time he was 12, before he was a teenager?
Yeah. Like, he didn't like people smoking. So I was like, he always said, like, I quit at 12. And one time I asked him, like, so when did you start? He started at 5. Just, walking down the streets in like Eastern Russia, picking up almost done cigarette butts and smoking them. But then at age 12, he understood that that's a bad habit. Like, this is just the skim, like the tip of the iceberg. His childhood was traumatic in a very real way. So I don't hold it against him that he had anger issues. I'm just looking at how that affected me and what I can do to deal with that, to clear that, to have compassion for where he was as a human being. Same for my mom. So it's super important to do this stuff in any way that you want. It can be with a therapist. It can be something that you do on your own, but that's very important so that you can make better choices for the future.
And another thing as well, I think that's completely right, Patricia, but if we look at the examples of our mums and our grandmothers and stuff like that, you'll notice that, they didn't deliberately seek out a scrote to procreate with, right? Do you know what I mean? And so, people say, oh, women like having like the higher standards is going to lead to, humanity dying out. I'm not necessarily referring to, the cases where the scrote is a cheat or, like my maternal grandmother, he basically jilted her at the altar and like left her with a kid on her own. But I'm just saying, like, if you've got an active choice, you want to choose a good partner. That is not a bad thing.
It's not.
And if you're not going to do it for yourself, do it for your future children and grandchildren. Because I always think that one of the best gifts a woman can give to her children is a good dad.
Wow. I like that. Absolutely. That sounds very true. Rings true.
So yeah, I'll caveat, this doesn't necessarily apply to, men who switch up because they can and do like move mad. I'm talking about, doing the best you can to ensure that you're choosing a good partner with the information that you have in front of you, if that makes sense.
Absolutely. And I would say even more, this is not a disservice to the male gender. This is a service to the male gender because they also don't want to be getting away with stupid shit. There is like an unsatisfactory essence in a life where you can do stupid shit and people around you are like, yeah, okay. Nobody wants that. Men also want to be better and you're helping them be better. And of course, within FDS, we're saying like, if we as a women, like as a female class impose these standards, then we're hopefully lifting the whole gender or, our environment. Hopefully. That's the theory, at least.
And also, just off the back of what Patricia said as well, like men don't want to be settled for. Like they might say, oh, please give the ugly guy a chance. But they also don't like it. And understandably, when they find out the woman that they've been with for 10 years doesn't actually find them physically attractive, they don't want to be settled for either. So, like Patricia said, if you have standards, you're actually doing, the men that you're not compatible with a favor because you're not settling for them, which is an even bigger insult and an even bigger pain to deal with.
Yeah, people want to be wanted, want to be chosen, want to be valued. Yeah. You're not doing anything a favor by settling for something that you don't want.
And this is why I've never understood, why men are so invested in debating down women's standard. It's like, why do you want to be settled for? No one deserves that.
Teacher, can I ask a question?
You may.
When you say men are invested, who do you mean? Do you mean Redditors? Like, where does that meet you in life?
I think the general narrative, I wouldn't say it's just Reddit. I think it's sort of everywhere, in that women are sort of either directly pressured, indirectly pressured into settling for a man. And I could do a whole episode on this because it's not just dating discourse, but I think things like the economy, it pushes women into settling. So it's very expensive to live on your own. And if women are on average earning less because of many reasons, then it's going to be more appealing for them to settle for a guy just so they can split the bills with them because it's cheaper.
Yeah, that is true. I read that article that you sent.
So yeah, we'll cover that in a future episode. But I think it's a lot of things. It's not just men on Reddit. I think, men on Reddit are the most potent and the most vocal, perhaps. But I think it's insidious everywhere.
I mean, I would love to learn more about that because, I'm living in a bubble. So people around me don't talk like that. But I'm sure that is still apparent through the socialization and the media that I'm consuming. So I would love to, maybe it's like an invisible cage that I'm in. I would love to be able to see the cage poles better. Yeah.
So the appeal to emotion. And I think this is a logical fallacy that women also engage in as much as men. Emotions are a powerful thing. We've spoken about this before, but at its core, it's about using emotions instead of logic to argue. And we've spoken about this in the previous episode where we understand that, when you're in a romantic relationship, emotions can be hard and they can get involved and they can cloud your judgment. However, I think that we as women, we can emotionally almost blackmail ourselves into seeing the best in men. And that's often to our detriment.
I hear you.
And I remember when FDS first came out and we had, I think FDS it was very direct in the early years, and it still somewhat is. But I remember the Daily Mail did an article about us and saying, oh, they're so mean. They don't want to date men who are mentally ill or who've got, mental health issues or this kind of man or that type of man.
Sorry, not sorry. I do not.
There we go. Maybe Patricia wrote that post that was blasted. Maybe it was you. And again, this is nothing against people who have got poor mental health. My heart goes out to them. But I think when you're choosing a life partner, it makes sense to want to choose somebody who you feel is going to be compatible with your lifestyle. And dealing with any kind of sickness or illness or disability or any kind of attribute that you feel is not conducive to your lifestyle is going to make your life a lot harder than it needs to be. That's an aside.
Yes, but there is a spectrum. So if a person had some mental health issues and he was able to deal with that and he has clarity about what happened, why, and how he dealt with it, how he will not fall into the same holes in the past, I respect that. We all, have complex pasts and experiences. But having said that, if I'm seeing somebody and I realize that he's manic because he's taken a lot of drugs, or that he's depressed, but he's comfortable there and he's not doing anything about that. So indeed, this is where the fallacy that you're presenting comes in. The motivation is not going to be, well, I should continue dating him because poor guy. That is not a valid thing because, like you say, pussy is not a social cause, right? You are entitled to date somebody that you actually are compatible with and adds value to your life.
Exactly. And I really appreciate that caveat as well. Because, again, it goes back to the idea that women are just mean for excluding men, for any reason. And you don't have to justify yourself. If you only want to date and marry men who were born at 12 p.m. on a Tuesday and were ripped from their mother's womb in an untimely fashion, i.e. born by cesarean section, that's entirely all right.
What? What was that? Cesarean. Oh, I see.
It's a line from Macbeth. So, okay, you've asked, you're going to get the full answer now. So Macbeth was a king of Scotland. I'm remembering it in bits, but they basically said that he would be killed by a man who was not born of a woman. And the plot twist was that the man who eventually killed him was born by cesarean section, so he wasn't born by a natural birth. And that was... Okay, so Macduff, he basically says as he drives a knife into Macbeth's heart, it was like, and from my mother's womb I was untimely ripped, so I was born by cesarean section.
Dang.
And that was how Macbeth died, basically.
That was a great example of an extremely specific standard.
Yeah, extremely specific reference.
Nice.
So there was that. And that's entirely all right. I think as long as you're not an arsehole to people who were born by a natural birth or born on any other day of the week, that's fine.
Yeah, I think this fallacy is a great example and kind of like emblematic for the other ones, because basically that's what we're saying. These kind of fallacies, what makes them fallacies a lot of the times is that they appeal to emotion, and then that triggers you into responding and engaging with them, but actually we're inviting you to look at the actual logical substance of them. And so this also ties back to the former one for me, when you're saying, oh, well, if you don't marry men who are not as great and can't pack their own lunch, then the human race will dwindle, and that will be on you, woman. So in the same way, but if you don't date men who are depressed or who have a drug abuse problem and have no inclination to deal with that, then what will happen to those guys? Well, you know what? That's not my problem, first of all.
And also, I find as well, I feel like women have a long way to go. So when people think, oh, what about all the broke, unemployed men? From what I've seen on the Are We Dating the Same Guy groups with Patricia, there are some women who will entertain them, so they'll be just fine.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's very easy to succumb into a perception of, there are no good guys, or good guys are so few and far between. So if I find one, I should really hold tight. And you know what? That's so not true. I held that belief for such a long time. And really, if you hold yourself high, if you have in mind what you want, and you engage with reality in a way that, shows how much you respect yourself and how much your boundaries are clear, you will have no worry. You will have many options, and then you just need to choose. It's all good. There aren't a lot of eligible men out there, but they do exist, and they're looking for you. So it's all good.
Agreed. Yeah, thanks, Patricia. On to the next one. So this is the no true Scotsman fallacy. And this is essentially where you dismiss almost counterexamples by redefining the group. So I'll give an example from the BDSM community, because they do this an awful lot, and they do it as a way to escape accountability for abusers in the scene. If a dominant abuses a sub, right, usually a male dom abusing a female sub, right, a lot of people say, oh, well, they're not a real dominant. And it's like, well, actually, who's to say they're not a real dominant? Because being a dominant is not a protected characteristic. I mean, you can say, I'm not a real doctor because I don't have a degree or a medical license or whatever, right? Because there's a defined definition of who can have the term doctor in front of their name, usually.
Yeah, it sounds like a cope mechanism where you create distance from something so that it doesn't have to shed a negative light on you.
Exactly. And the no true Scotsman fallacy is, we see this in dating, where women are told, well, if you have a career, then you're not feminine, or you're not submissive enough, or you're not wifey material if you want to be independent. And that is all nonsense, quite frankly.
Sorry, can you explain again how this example showcases the fallacy?
It showcases it because, for example, if a woman is independent, career-minded, people will say that she's not wifey material, even though there are plenty of men who will happily date women who are career-minded, independent, driven, ambitious, etc. And so, they would say, basically dismiss her as being a wife material based on their own preferences and understanding of what it means to be a wife, if that makes sense.
Interesting. So they take their own preferences and expand that unrightfully on the whole group?
Yes, and then dismiss other options that may not fit their view.
Aha. So how do you deal with this fallacy? How do you debunk it?
I just ignore it, number one, because ultimately,
Okay.
Well, no, but in the context of dating, if a guy is saying like, oh, your career, or, if you want to work on your career and if you want to have money, then you're not feminine, it's like, well, it just shows that we're not compatible, because again, there are plenty of men who value that ambition and drive and career mindedness in a woman, because they're usually the same.
Yeah, it's just not the person for me. If I'm dating somebody and he has issue with me having male friends, it's just not the person for me. It's just not what I want in life.
Exactly. So, I suppose you could apply it to FDS principles when we say high value and low value men. But one thing that FDS has always said is that ultimately, what makes a man high or low value in part depends on your own preferences. So I think there's a non-negotiable. So he can't be abusive, not a porn addict, etc. But for example, a high value man who likes to go hiking every weekend, in the meantime, you like going, on the big, massive holidays to Dubai or to the Caribbean, and he's not interested in that. he might be objectively high value, but he may not be high value for you, if that makes sense. But that doesn't mean that he's not a high value man. He's just not compatible with you.
Absolutely.
Or he may not be compatible with you.
Yeah, it depends what you want, right? If he wants somebody to join him and you want somebody to join you, then that's a bit of an issue.
And you don't want to join each other, that might be a bit of an issue. That's just an example, but yeah.
Yeah, like for instance, I go to Burns usually in the summer. Like I'm a proud member of the Burn community. I love it. It's a significant part of my life. That's like where I feel most at home, and that's where I can express my creativity and have fun with friends and just have a ball and, lose my mind a little bit. And I am completely comfortable with being partnered with somebody who doesn't go to Burns. I'm totally fine with that. But he does need to be respectful and appreciative of me going to them. So that is the value for me. But maybe my other burner friends want to only be with the burner. So yeah, it really depends. I don't know if I got this fallacy like all the way through, but maybe I should like let it roll around in my mind a bit. The no true Scotsman fallacy.
Yeah, let it marinate. Because I think out of all the fallacies, this one is the most difficult to get a grasp on because it's a lot more subtle. Because ultimately it comes down to semantics, right? So for example, if I go back to my BDSM example, ideally a dominant should be, should essentially care about their submissive, right? And, they should do right by them. People assume that that is now an objective standard when it's not. There's nothing, a dominant doesn't need a license to practice as a dominant. Anyone can just say they're a dominant and you can't really challenge that because there's no objective standard. And so this one really deals with sort of, semantics in a way. And it leads in nicely to our next one in terms of the appeal to popularity, which is, this is the one that gets on my nerves the most and I'd say triggers me the most. And it's essentially arguing that something is right or true because a lot of people believe it to be right or true. The reason why it triggers me, though, is because a lot of people, again, my intellectual snobbery is coming out. I feel this is a safe space, since Patricia said it. Intellectual snobbery, like coming out. A lot of people are sheep. A lot of people don't think for themselves. A lot of people just basically follow the crowd. Just because a lot of people believe something, that doesn't mean it's correct. At one point, majority of people believed that the earth was flat. That wasn't correct. And we see this a lot in dating again. It sort of comes back to other women as well, policing down women's standards. So, for example, a common one is, oh, you'll never find a guy who doesn't watch porn. So therefore, you should put up with porn in a relationship. It's normal. And it's like, well, just because a lot of people do something, that doesn't mean it's the right thing to do. It just means that it's popular. But popularity isn't the same as something being right, true, or good.
Definitely. I think moreover in today's world, it's not that everybody believes the same things, but indeed, as you say, it's easy for people to accept a certain dogma or a certain belief and just flow with it, especially if it's presented in a way that is emotionally attractive and kind of like catches them, and they don't, apply the critical thinking needed to observe each and every one of the facets of this dogma or of this approach and see if it actually makes sense, if it actually has merit. And kind of similarly to what we said about, the fact that marriages didn't fall apart during, like, let's say, the middle of the last century, doesn't mean that that was good. It was just how things were. And indeed, popularity, we also touched upon that in our episode about, like, how to be a bad bitch, kind of. It had a different name, but yeah, how to be your own person. And as I said, it's very hard for us to think about things that are outside of what we know, but we must, because what we know is very, very limited. Like, I'm only recently starting to understand that like, what I know is very limited. There's so much that I don't know and don't even think about because my mind is limited to what it knows and the information that it has.
Exactly. So always remember that as well. And I think we spoke about this before, in that the average person, Patricia, is not very happy with their life. They don't know what they're doing either. And again, I'm not saying I'm above being indoctrinated. Obviously, some of the choices that I've made are in part because of, wider societal messaging. I'm not above it. But it's also good to recognize that you are also subject to, because those people who just always think that they're so enlightened because they think that they're above indoctrination, when actually, almost like the crypto bros, right? They think that, I'm above indoctrination because I think, trad finance is a scam, when actually, the crypto market has indoctrinated you in a different way. Do you know what I mean? Like, everybody is exposed to influence and indoctrination, right? It's just being able to recognize that.
Absolutely. I mean, it's a complex thing. I don't think we can escape our socialization. Maybe we can build up on it and observe it, but To think that you're above and beyond it means that you're in like the Lululand, like for real the Lululand, like you're being psychotic.
Yeah, exactly. And it's also recognized that, when you think about something that's popular, say, i.e., men watching porn, you recognize, okay, this is a popular view, but what does it actually involve? Like, is it the right view? So you then go and do your own research and come to your own conclusion.
Absolutely. I think indeed the gist of this thing is the overarching theme of this whole episode series or double episode series, that we need to look at arguments for what they are, try to perceive them with clean eyes. And in the context of popularity, a lot of the times the things that are most popular, especially when we're talking about mainstream media, is the lowest common denominator. If you look at the shows that are most watched on Netflix, it's not the most quality shows. On the contrary, things that are like super high quality, super cutting edge, they don't get continued to the second season because not enough people watch them on the first week or something. It's very bad if you're going for what's popular. You should choose your own thing.
Exactly. And this is probably why FDS it caused such a drop in the ocean in terms of dating advice, is because we weren't interested in what the popular view was. And actually, if you interrogate what the popular view is, you will often uncover something that is, I wouldn't say a scam, but what you'll often find is that there's a reason why that is being pushed as a dominant narrative. And it's not in the best interests of humanity as a whole. It's in the best interest of a select group of people.
Oh, absolutely. And especially if we're talking about feminism, this is a great example of it because, as we know, lib-fem media is controlled by corporations, it's controlled by men. They're spewing a certain narrative that suits them. And that's what I really like about FDS. It's that it's not a rigid dogma. It's more a value-based system where our aim is to benefit women. And the concepts around it can change because what is important is to put yourself in the center and to trust yourself and to look at reality as it is. It's not about, following a set of rules.
Exactly. When I was on the Audacity podcast, I also said this as well. This is why we also get flamed by radical feminists, by separatist feminists. It's not that we're anti-feminist. It's more that we are female first. And every branch of, feminism, in our view, they have some elements that are not necessarily in women's best interests.
Yeah, I can't even say the word. Like, I would never call myself a feminist. I would say that I favor women.
A female supremacist, female for...
No, I would use like more descriptive language because I feel like the word feminism has been tainted for like the last 2 decades.
I can get on board with that. And, for me, I borrow aspects from all types of feminism. Even liberal feminism gets completely dragged, but I can recognize that for many people, like liberal feminism is perhaps a gateway to things like radical feminism, FDS, because I think a lot of people, at least myself, we first came across like liberal feminism. And to me, it didn't really make a lot of sense, but that was my first exposure to feminism. And then that gave me almost like the platform and the ability to critique it and then find other branches of feminism that better resonated with my worldview, such as radical feminism, gender critical feminism, even separatist feminism.
Yeah, starting to understand certain vocabularies. And indeed, lib-fem does have its merits. Like, I think the whole notion of women having it all, I don't know if it's correct, but I do hold this notion and this desire of having both a career and a family and a personal life. Maybe I'm in total Lululand, but I still hold that desire. And I think that's like a liberal feminist concept. I don't know. What do you think?
I think liberal feminism did a good job at getting rights enshrined for women in law, but perhaps that didn't translate to actually changing the dynamics between men and women, which is what I think that radical feminism, separatist feminism, perhaps more radical forms of feminism are better actually addressing. Because you can legislate stuff in law, but that doesn't necessarily change behavior over time, right? It's just like everyone knows that murder is illegal in every jurisdiction, but murders still happen because it doesn't change behavior. I think what only changes behavior is, women at the personal level, making changes in how they interact and respond to men. And if we all did that en masse, that will have a greater impact than just putting it into law on its own.
Absolutely. Yeah, I think in broad strokes, like the problem with liberal feminism is that it goes out of the assumption that the genders are equal. And I don't think they are equal. They're not.
I think we are equal, but we are different.
They're not the same. It's kind of like women can do anything that a man does because we're the same. We're not the same. We're different.
I'd agree with that assertion, 100%. Right, we are in the home stretch. So the next one, we've sort of touched upon it a bit in the ad hominem, but it's a genetic fallacy. So you reject an argument based on where it's come from than its merit. This is probably the laziest form of logical fallacy, because I have said good information can come from anywhere, and rejecting it, based off where it's come from is just lazy, quite frankly. Yeah, I don't really know what else to say about that one. And I think an example of this one would be women only think a certain way because of feminism. I'm like, okay, and what's that got to do with the actual argument or substance of what's being said?
Yeah, I guess it's like a way to discredit an argument that you're making because the listener is correlating it with a dogma that he doesn't appreciate. So then it kind of puts you in the corner.
Yes.
Yeah, within my political views, it's kind of common to say, oh, leftist.
Yeah, or it's common to reject it based on who said it. So it's not an ad hominem because, let's say Donald Trump said, I believe all women should be equal to men. If he said that, an ad hominem would be oh, he's a rapist. Well, actually, no, that's not an ad hominem, but that's true. But if they said
well, Donald Trump said it. Yeah, Orange Man said it.
But the genetic fallacy would be, oh, Donald Trump said it. So it's not untrue that he said it, but it doesn't actually deal with what he said, if that makes sense. So ad hominem is more offensive. Genetic is actually just attacking the origin.
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense. I guess it ties back into, I may be repeating myself, but basically trying to see pieces of information as themselves and arguments for what they are trying to, describe, and not based on if you correlate them with a certain person, group, or, worldview. Address the actual argument.
Yes, exactly.
Could you give another example just to make it a little bit more colorful?
Oh, they subscribe to FDS. It happens all the time on Reddit. Do you know when people, I suppose that's more ad hominem, but when people dismiss what we say, because I see all the time people are, oh, you're an FDS woman. I'm like, well, so.
Guilty as charged. So that kind of means oh, your opinions are painted by this dogma that is, let's say, very offensive, very hurtful, very whatever. So that means your arguments don't have merit because of the other beliefs that you probably hold by your affiliation.
Yeah, exactly. But that doesn't make the argument untrue. So, and then finally, the burden of proof fallacy. So I would say this is a common one, and you see it all the time on social media. It's essentially, I think there's two axes to this. So burden of proof, it lies with the person, making the extraordinary claim. It's not down to the other person to prove your argument. So, for example, to explain it in a way that I hope is clear, the burden of proof is essentially who is responsible for proving the claim in any argument. In a legal context, the person making the claim, i.e. the claim or the claimant or the plaintiff.
Yeah, the person who's suing you for something, they need to show that you did this something.
Yeah, they're essentially the one who is responsible for proving their own argument. But what people will try to do in an argument is try to shift the burden of proof. So if a man says, oh, women only date, men who are super, super tall, let's say above 6 feet, and then, I counter and say, well, that's not true, then they would then try and, shifting the burden of proof would essentially be that guy then trying to make me prove their own argument when that's not my responsibility. If you make the claim, you provide the evidence for it.
Like in this example, he would tell you, give me one name of a woman celebrity that's dating somebody who's shorter than him. And then he would say Zendaya, and then the argument will be stopped.
Yeah, or they'd say something like, well, Google it. And it's like, well, it's not my job to prove your argument. It's up to you because you're the one making that claim. I'm not the one making it.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, I feel you. That's very annoying when people read up about it. Why would I? If you want me to read up about it, send me a link. I will.
And I say all the time, it's not my job to prove your argument. That's your job because I'm not the one making the argument.
Nice. Yeah, that's easy. I like that.
And so in the context of low standards then, so as an example, if a man says, for example, as you said, that, giving the less attractive guy a chance would lead to a better outcome, a way to counter that would be, okay, so where's your proof that giving the less attractive guy a chance is going to lead to a better outcome? I mean, for me in dating.
Okay. So you're putting the burden of proof on them in this segment.
Yeah, because the burden of proof, it should lie with the person making the claim. So if a guy claims that giving the less attractive guy a chance is going to lead to a better outcome, it is on them to prove it. So it's a completely fair question to say that where's your proof that settling it leads to better outcomes? And they often won't answer the question because they have no evidence. This is why they will try and shift the burden of proof onto you.
Saying, show me that dating men that are, of better quality leads to better results. That would be the shift.
Exactly. And so it's almost like a sleight of hand, and you have to really see it for what it is. But basically, the way to counter this in any form of life and dating, if you didn't make the claim, it's not your responsibility to prove the claim or disprove it. It's not your responsibility because, you are making a completely separate argument.
Are you making a completely separate argument? Does that mean that you need in this, if you want to engage in that argument, that you need to strengthen your argument?
It can be a separate point or it can be a counterpoint. Because sometimes I think, especially online, when you don't have the value of physical communication when talking to people, I'm not sure if you found it, but people are not actually arguing against your point, but they're actually agreeing with you, but they just don't realize it. It's happened to me so many times. I'm like, so you actually agree with my point then, but you're just trying to argue it because you're not understanding what I'm saying.
What else are they going to do? They're sitting alone in their basement covered in Cheetos.
Where did that I've never eaten Cheetos before. Where did that Cheeto stereotype come from?
I think it's like I know it from a South Park series of episodes where there's like the quintessential hacker, and he's just a guy sitting on his basement, reclining way back on a gaming chair, and he's covered in Cheetos dust.
That's funny. That's funny. Okay. As a side. Good done. But yeah, so essentially, the burden of proof, it always lies with the person making the extraordinary claim.
Okay.
If somebody is encouraging you to lower your standards, like personally, when people do this fallacy, this is probably my hard limit in terms of I just don't engage, because if you can't even be bothered to research your own argument, then it's just not worth engaging in, because I just think it's extremely intellectually lazy, probably one of the laziest fallacies on this list. And again, especially in the context of, men and even some women, it's always women who are expected to do more emotional and intellectual labor to justify their standards. So say no to that.
The one making the extraordinary claim is expecting you to debunk him, but actually it is up to him to verify what he's saying.
Or they're expecting you to essentially prove their argument.
It's not up to you to say, what? That's preposterous. How about da-da-da-da-da? You just don't need to do that. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And if anything, because they expect you to prove their argument. And it's like, why would I prove an argument that I don't agree with?
I think mostly from examples that come into my mind, it usually makes like me, if I'm confronted with an extraordinary argument, it makes me want to debunk it, right? Because I'm surprised, I'm shocked, and I know that it is untrue. So I'm trying to disprove it, but actually I don't need to, because I wasn't the one making it. It's up to the other person to validate it, not on me to disprove it. Does that make sense?
That makes sense. So, to wrap up, that is our final list of the logical fallacies. And I think that when you're aware of them, they are very, very easy to spot. And you realize that a lot of people who say a lot of words and who seem quite articulate, they fall foul of this all the time. And to me, I think it's fun to see them trip on their own shoelaces.
That's really cool. That was a really cool double episode. I really enjoyed learning about that. And maybe we can upload the fallacies themselves, like the lists in the show notes.
Yes, yeah. I think there's even probably more that we haven't covered. So I will upload them in the show notes. So check them out. And your homework, so to speak. And so our parting gift to you is, now you've got the tools to spot a logical fallacy. See if you can spot in your day-to-day life, at work, in your relationships, out in the wild, when you're watching the news, especially politicians, they do a lot of them. Because ultimately, knowledge is power, and this is a powerful tool to avoid being manipulated and to avoid people trying to throw you red herrings so they don't actually have to engage with what you're saying. So yeah, see if you can spot them in your day-to-day life.
Yeah, I really like this. I will try, Savannah. I shall try.
Yeah, and let us know what you think. How many did you spot, and where did you spot them the most?
Yes.
And let us know. See you next week, Queens.
See you next week.